Biden issued an executive action to close much of the U.S. Mexico border between ports of entry. This decision comes in response to an average of over 2,500 daily crossings over a 7-day period. The order also will affect those seeking asylum. Joining me now is Dustin Siggins, founder of Proven Media Solutions. Dustin, thanks for coming on.
Stacey, glad to be on again.
It's good to have you back. I saw this, and I don't mind telling you, I feel like we're in. Um, Please pardon me, but sounds like a lot of BS. Like what exactly do we take from the fact that he spent 3 years with the border wide open, and now all of a sudden, less than 5 months from an election, we're going to close it down?
From what you've just described is really precise, and I'll add a little color to it, which is 4 days or so after Donald Trump is convicted of felonies, the president has to follow his opponent's lead. That can't look good. Second, Gallup has consistently shown immigration to be the most important issue to the plurality of Americans. And as you said, it's right before the election. NBC News reported that similar actions tried by Trump are blocked by the courts 5-6 years ago. The ACLU is already preparing to sue. This might get overturned in the courts as well.
Well, so again, I'm just sitting here, a regular American reading every news story I can. And Dustin, it's interesting that any court could overturn a member of the executive, namely the commander in chief, from executing his right that is duly afforded to him by congressional action. Congress actually remanded the control of our borders as a nation. All of the borders are controlled, all immigration is controlled in the executive branch. And that was signed into legislation and has been the case for decades now. It was also the reason that was used to tell governors that they couldn't do anything about the wildly unfortunate scenarios that are unfolding in their states because of illegal aliens pouring in. So how does a court then reverse itself on itself to say that Biden can't do this?
I wish I could answer that question. At the end of the day, it does seem like courts are, shall we say, flexible in how they interpret certain things. And you find a court over here who's more conservative, one here is over more liberal, and you know, both sides do it. They pick their courts. And the ACLU is one of the more successful legal organizations in the country. I'm sure their strategy was mapped out months ago.
So now we also have and I think maybe it's something that needs to be taken over by our meme lords over on X and other social media sites, right, Dustin, they could take on the actual embarrassment of seeing a president and with his same mouth say that his opponent is a felon, and then also say, but my opponent has great ideas. Watch me emulate him now.
Well, and what he's arguing is that he's not emulating him. He's arguing that the Senate bill that failed a few months ago, and he's acting because Congress wouldn't. At the end of the day, from just solely from a campaign perspective, solely from the public brand perspective, the president is following the lead of his just convicted opponent. It's not a good look. I think based on what NBC reported, it looks like there's a good chance it'll get overturned in the courts. It's coming across as a purely political ploy, even though the president did try to say our borders are not political weapons.
So we understand that, obviously the bigger deal for Americans is the carnage that's happening at the border. You see the highest level of migrant deaths on an annual basis ever in the history of tracking that metric. People crossing over into America and dying on American soil. There's not a lot of resources down there. It's a very hot, arid area. Much of it is desert, privately owned ranches that used to be well maintained, but now those individuals who own the property can't even do anything with it. They can't protect their property. I think when we look at what you do at Proven Media Solutions, you help shape opinion. You go out and you find out what Americans are thinking about and talking about, and you inform them. How can we work to inform people on this to help them have a clearer understanding of how ridiculous Biden's order is, and there are no teeth to it in addition to that?
I think arguing that there's no teeth is going to be hard to sell to those who are inclined to naturally believe someone in a position of power or influence, especially when we're only talking about 2% of the voting population that is likely to make a difference in November. And so I think the better angle is, for 9 years, Democrats have been trying to nail Trump to the wall, and they thought they got him. And 4 days later, Biden's following his lead with, as you noted, holes in the order that's supposed to close the border. I think just pointing out that he could have done something for 3 years, as you said at the outset of the segment. Could have done anything for 3 years. And suddenly, 5 months before the election, 4 days after Trump comes out of court, he has to follow his lead. I think that's a drumbeat that has to be pushed and hit until election day. The president isn't a leader. There's a crisis, and all he's doing is following his opponent's lead.
Yeah, and you know, Dustin, there's something else about that that's really it's frightening because we look at the number of migrant children who have entered the country. There many of them untracked. I think the number most recently reported is 115,000 of them. They're not able to reach the sponsor that they delivered that child to. So they're essentially missing children, but they're in the United States, but they're missing from the system. They're not being monitored. The social worker who's assigned cannot verify that they are still at the address, still with the sponsor, et cetera. That's an enormous number of children, right? That's greater than the population of the town that I live in by 10, you know, it's like 10 times more than the people who live in my little town.
Yes.
And these are children, right? So if it's adults who are missing, it's not really the same thing as if it's children. And then there's the issue of who's paying for their care. It's American taxpayers. And President Biden has said he wants to let the Trump tax cuts and Jobs Act expire, which will make a significant outlay for American families.
Well, and at the end of the day, I didn't know the number was that high of unaccompanied minor children. That's a huge number. I mean, the trafficking is such a huge concern at the border. You have to wonder what percentage of these kids are being trafficked, and you know, and what percentage are their parents are so desperate they sent their kids alone. It's heartbreaking. And so, I think you're right that there's a real concern here about the safety of these children, and closing down the border can help stop the incentives that might be going in that direction, i.e., open border, you know, come across smugglers, etc., traffickers. At the same time, you know, I'm not an expert on social services. I can't even begin to think about how to help these kids, especially when this executive order is coming 3 years too late.
Yeah, and the point you're making there is very important because the timing of this executive order appears to be just enough to create a media firestorm around it and allow people to, they can talk about it. They can, he's doing something. The do nothing Congress is helping. Congress enjoys a very low approval rating among Americans, so it's not a stretch for them to imagine that Biden is castigating them appropriately. And then, you know, we get to the election, and if he's reelected, he goes back to the status quo because there's nothing binding about this EO on DHS or any of the services. They've dismantled much of our apparatus that is supposed to stop this illegal activity.
And while you were just talking, I double checked what I had read a month ago. Immigration has been the most important issue by quite a bit, 27% of Americans compared to government issues in general at 18%, and the economy at 17. Biden's team isn't stupid. They know what the American people care about, and they know that this is surging to the top of, as to not plagiarize Gallup, the top of the most important problem list. And it's been there for most of the year. At the end of the day, again, Biden's team isn't stupid.
Yeah, he's not. And, you know, Dustin, I love that you were able to do that live while we're on the air here, because I will tell you, in my research, when I'm looking at the polls, and I always take the polls with, you know, with a grain of salt, the more political they are, the more likely they are to maybe be a little skewed. But on this kitchen table stuff, Americans actually, I think, it's the easiest poll to trust when you say, what are the top 10 issues? Abortion never hits the top 10, but immigration is in the top 10, and it has been for the past 3 years. It's an interesting thing. You can actually go and look that up and see how much more important immigration has become every year of the Biden administration to Americans, even though the reporting on it in corporate media is very, very scant.
Well, and even Philip Bum, Washington Post, you know, hardly a pro-Trump character, leads a piece that he published. Let's see, I just want to double check the date. It was May 6th, so it was a month ago. Citing the New York Times executive editor who said to a different outlet, at the moment, democracy is one of the biggest issues facing, you know, that people care about, but it's, quote, it's not the top one. Immigration happens to be the top of polls, and the economy and inflation is second. Biden's losing he's getting cream, or actually, I should say, he's creaming the American people on the two most important issues, and he thinks he's found the political solution to one of them.
Yeah, so I'm just maybe I'm too pessimistic. Maybe I read too much news. But Dustin, I don't see this working in a year
No.
where a lot of families across the country, the reason immigration is an important issue for them now is because their child's school has been taken over to house migrants, or their child is in a classroom and 50% of the classroom now speaks another language, or 10. This isn't something that will help those families that are now reevaluating their educational options over the summer for the fall because of the influx of migrant children. I think he's miscalculating. It's almost as if he thinks the American populace is dumb or unplugged. I think the reason the issue is so important is because it's personally impacting Americans.
I think at the end of the day, again, maybe I'm too simplistic. Hammer nail PR guy says PR is the thing to talk about. I think the fact that NBC is pointing out that ACLU is going to sue, Representative Jayapal, Progressive Caucus leader, is going after the Biden administration very publicly. He's getting cream from the left, cream from the right. I don't see this winning any of the messaging that he wants to have an effect on by November.
Well, what we can do is look for your work online everywhere you write for all of the major papers, and we're so grateful to have you here. Dustin Siggins, founder of Proven Media Solutions. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Stacey.
All right, coming up after this SNC Fast Break, New York Times bestselling author David Lipsky will join me to discuss his latest book, The Parrot and the Igloo, Climate and the Science of Denial, right after this.